Hi, my name is Angela, and while to many I appear to be a woman with everything in place and no reason to complain, inside I often feel like a guest in my own family and in my own life. I'm 35 years old, and for 10 years now I've been working as a data analyst at a large bank, where every day consists of endless spreadsheets, numbers, and forecasts. Although I sometimes get tired of this monotony, it's thanks to this job that I've been able to afford what I once only dreamed of, my own spacious apartment in the city, purchased with a mortgage, and a small, cozy house by the lake, which has become a true refuge for me and a reminder that there is room for peace, quiet, and simple joys in life. In the summer, I almost always spend weeks there, waking to the cries of seagulls and the smell of warm pine resin, wandering barefoot along the shore and warming my palms on a mug of morning coffee. And in the winter and fall, when the city's grayness begins to weigh on me and projects wear me down, I go there for the weekend, light a fire in the fireplace, and sit wrapped in a blanket, reveling in the fact that I owe nothing to anyone and can afford to be just a woman, not an endlessly responsible analyst. The house is only a few hours' drive from my apartment, which is convenient, since it's in the same state where I live and work, while my family lives in the neighboring state, and the drive to them takes 6 hours, long enough for me to justify my infrequent appearances, but short enough that I don't seem like a completely alienated daughter. Frankly, I'm happy with this distance. I don't have to deal with the daily family squabbles, endless discussions of other people's problems, and petty dramas that my parents love to stir up, and I can still visit them for holidays and birthdays, which I think is perfectly acceptable to them. My parents recently turned 60, and yet they continue to act as if their lives revolve solely around their youngest daughter, my sister Vanessa, who is 32. She has been married to Matteo for a long time, and to everyone around them, they have always been a model couple, someone to be proud of, and they have been the main focus of the family spotlight since childhood. I got used to this long ago, although it was once painful to realize that my achievements were taken for granted, and every event in Vanessa's life turned into a triumphal story that my parents are ready to tell again and again. I even once, driven by a sincere desire to please, gave my family a spare key to our lake house so they could use it if they wanted to spend time outdoors. It seemed like the right move at the time. Why not share something that brings me joy? Besides, they didn't come often, a couple of times a year, no more, so I didn't feel any inconvenience. All this continued until April of this year, when I went to celebrate Vanessa's birthday. She decided to throw a party at her parents' house, and when I arrived, I brought her a gift. A beautiful box of expensive skincare products she'd mentioned once. It seemed like a small thing, but I knew she'd be pleased. The party, as always, followed the usual pattern: a long table filled with family and friends, and endless conversations about Vanessa and Matteo's lives, her new promotion, the car he'd recently bought, and the kitchen renovation my parents were planning soon. Mom occasionally turned to me, asking, "How are you, Angela?" And every time I opened my mouth to say a few words about my job, the house, or something else that was bothering me, my sister would quickly steal my attention, interjecting another story about her successes or funny little details about their family life. After the third attempt, I simply fell silent, focused on my food, and listened to everyone praising my sister again and again. Surprisingly, I barely felt any irritation anymore. I guess I'd simply gotten used to being the listener in these conversations. Toward the end of the evening, as dinner was drawing to a close, Vanessa suddenly turned to me and asked with a slight grin, "So what are you planning on doing with your lake house this summer?" I shrugged, trying to sound indifferent. "As always, I'll go there alone or maybe with friends. I'll think about it some more, maybe even rent it out for a couple of weeks to help pay off the mortgage." At that moment, I noticed my parents exchange a strange glance, as if a silent agreement had passed between them. But I didn't pay it any mind at the time, deciding that it was probably just a small detail or another one of their secret family plans. I stayed overnight at my parents' place, and the next day, having packed up, I headed home, returning to my usual rhythm of life, where intense immersion in a new big data analysis project became the focus. As always, work completely pushed memories of the holiday and those strange looks out of my mind. 2 weeks later, as I sat at my desk in the office, mechanically crunching lines of code and numbers in yet another spreadsheet, my phone suddenly vibrated on the table, interrupting my concentration and making me jump. The screen lit up, and I saw messages starting to arrive in our family group chat. which included me, my parents, Vanessa and Mateo, as well as several aunts, uncles, and even cousins, as usual. I wasn't expecting anything interesting, but the next message made my hands go cold. "We've thought it all over and decided to rent a house by Angela's Lake for the whole summer. We'll be there every day, it'll be amazing," Vanessa wrote. I couldn't help but stare at the screen with an expression like I didn't quite understand what was going on, and then I reread the message again, but the words hadn't changed, and every single one of them hurt my eyes. Within a minute, excited replies poured into the chat, as if someone had opened the door to some shared treasure. Emojis with hearts, thumbs ups, and happy smiley faces filled the screen. "Oh, wonderful," Aunt Carla wrote. "I'd love to vacation there too." My cousin Mark added, "Sign us up for the weekend, it'll be fun." Cousin Sarah immediately responded, "I'll definitely go there for a vacation." And all these voices sounded as if they were talking about something completely natural, as if no one had even considered that the house belonged to me and that I might have plans of my own. I felt a heaviness, mixed with disbelief, begin to rise in my chest. No one asked my opinion, no one tried to check if I was comfortable, everyone simply assumed my property was theirs to do with as they saw fit. I typed a reply, trying to keep my fingers steady even though they were shaking. "Actually, you should have asked me first. I'm planning a vacation there in June alone. I want a break from everyone and don't need neighbors, even if they're relatives." And then, as if I'd triggered an avalanche, the chat exploded. Vanessa, of course, was the first to respond. "Don't be so selfish." Mateo followed suit, writing, "Come on, Angela, it's just a house." I stared at the screen, unable to believe that these were words from loved ones. "This house belongs to all of us." And Carla added, "You can't talk about family like that," Uncle Nestor concluded. I tried again and again to explain that this was my house, that I was paying the mortgage, and that I had the right to decide who stayed there and when, but my words seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The messages kept coming, one after another, and they were all full of reproaches, accusations, and claims that I was being unreasonable, harsh, and selfish. And then something happened that completely knocked the wind out from under me. My mother, the same one for whom I bought a new microwave when their old one broke, the one for whom I quietly bought a washing machine when the old one stopped working, and the same dishwasher they wanted but couldn't afford, wrote, "Everyone, just ignore Angela's message, she'll come over eventually and do what we want," and her words were followed by more likes, hearts, and laughing emojis, as if I had just been humiliated in front of everyone, and it was met with cheerful approval. I sat and stared at the screen, my blood pressure soaring and my temples pounding. Yes, my family had always taken me for granted, but what had just happened was a whole new level for me. I recalled all the times I'd helped Vanessa pay her car insurance, helped out my aunts and uncles with medical bills or dental work, and all that time I'd thought I was doing a good deed, supporting my loved ones without asking for anything in return. But this was how they really treated me, as if my property, my money, and my efforts were common property, free to use whenever they wanted. At that moment, I made a decision: if they were playing games, so be it, but I would give them a surprise they'd remember for a long time. Not letting my emotions get the better of me, I opened my calendar at work and requested a few days off. My plan was simple: get to the lake house before everyone else, take my place, and prevent them from running my life as they pleased. The drive took about an hour, not much compared to the 6 hours my relatives would have to spend driving from their home state, and this feeling of advantage filled me with a pleasant warmth, as if I finally had some kind of advantage in this strange family game. The next morning, barely managing to take my first sip of strong coffee, I dialed the security company my bank had long trusted and calmly but firmly explained that I needed immediate installation of security cameras around the entire perimeter of my lake house. To my relief, the technicians arrived that very same day, dressed in work uniform, with tools and equipment, and methodically, with the confident efficiency of people who know their business, began mounting cameras on the corners of the roof, near the garage, and at the front door. They then connected the system so I could see everything happening in real time from my laptop and even my phone. They also installed a modern alarm system, sensitive to every movement, and assured me that if anyone attempted to break into the house, I would be notified immediately, and the police would be alerted automatically. When they left, leaving behind neat traces of their work and confidence in their reliability, I wasted no time. I called a locksmith and invited him to change the locks on all the doors. I watched him remove the old cylinders, insert new ones, check the smoothness of the key's rotation, and with each click of metal, my heart grew lighter. Now I was the only one with the keys, and no one else had access to this house. I stood on the porch, looking at the lake gently swaying in the wind and at my house framed by pine trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not only peace but also satisfaction. I had finally set a boundary they couldn't cross so easily. They thought I would back off again, close my eyes, and let them run my life as if it were theirs, but now everything was different, and very soon they would understand. I returned to the city, re-entered the work rhythm, the usual meetings and deadlines, but now I had another small but important ritual. Every morning and every evening, I opened the app and checked the cameras. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. The yard remained empty, the porch clean, only the occasional bird or squirrel would scurry into the frame. I even began to think they might have resigned themselves to it, but my heart told me no, it was just a lull. And indeed, at the very end of May, before the heat had even begun to intensify, a new message appeared in the family chat. "Tomorrow we're all going to Angela's lake house," Vanessa wrote cheerfully, as if it were a long-decided decision. I reread her words and felt the corners of my lips involuntarily curl upward. Who gave them the right to decide for me anyway? But the rest of the correspondence was even more predictable. My parents immediately replied, "We'll be there." Aunt Carla wrote, "Wouldn't want to miss it." Uncle Nestor and Aunt Sharon added, "We're in." Several cousins also hastened to confirm their participation, and the chat lit up with happy emojis, as if they were gathering for some kind of celebration. And I sat there, reading all this and smiling, because I knew tomorrow would truly be interesting. The next morning began with me sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, a cup of freshly brewed coffee next to me, and opening the live feed from the cameras. The drink quickly went cold, but I didn't care. What was happening on the screen was far more engaging than any work. At first, the yard was empty, the sun glinted off the water, and the shadows of the trees glided across the roof of the house, but around noon, I saw a familiar SUV slowly pull into the driveway. It was Vanessa and Mateo, following them, with precise precision, as if they had arranged it beforehand. My parents' sedan pulled up. Immediately behind them, two more cars appeared, my aunt and uncle in one, my cousins in the other. Everyone parked and poured out into the courtyard, laughing, chatting animatedly, and dragging bags, coolers, and entire coolers on wheels behind them, as if they were planning to spend not just a day there, but a whole week. Vanessa, as always, was the first to decisively approach the front door, pulled out a key, and, with the air of a housewife, tried to insert it into the lock. I watched with interest as she turned it, but the metal wouldn't budge. She tried again, then tugged harder, but the result remained the same. I could almost hear her irritation growing. Mateo approached the door, pulled out his key, tried it, and still nothing. At that moment, I noticed confusion slowly appearing on their faces, then alarm. They began muttering, waving their hands, as if searching for an explanation, but then Mateo looked up and pointed directly at the camera mounted above the door. Everyone froze, then turned in unison and stared at her, and even through the screen I could see their expressions change, first surprise, then realization, and finally anger. They realized what had happened, and that I, quiet, compliant Angela, had decided to do something they had never expected. And then my phone came to life. My mother called first. I glanced at the screen but didn't answer. A minute later, Vanessa called. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mateo tried his luck, also unsuccessfully. Then my aunt and uncle started calling. I sat quietly, letting the phone shake on the table, ignoring all their calls, savoring the moment, as if for the first time in years I truly felt in control of my life. Messages began pouring into the family chat like a stream of dirty water bursting from an old, rusty faucet, and each new word struck me like an indictment. Vanessa, of course, was the first to write. "Angela has lost her mind, she changed the locks." Mateo immediately added, "This is ridiculous, we drove 6 hours for this." And I could almost hear his exasperated breath caught between the lines. My mother quickly chimed in, "How could you do this to your family?" And my father, instead of taking my side for once, wrote, "You've let us all down, this is unacceptable." Other voices followed, like a chorus, and Carla lamented, "I took time off work for this." Uncle Nestor, always blunt, wrote, "You're a complete and utter selfish person." With each new remark, a smirk appeared on my face, and that smirk grew until Mateo spoke again, only this time his words were even more absurd. "I'll break down this door." I laughed out loud, almost choking on my own anger, and without hesitation, I typed out a reply, "If you break down this door, the alarm will go off and the police will arrive in a few minutes. You will all be arrested for trespassing." I watched on the camera screen as the noisy group almost simultaneously pulled out their phones and buried them in them, reading my message, and then, at that very moment, as their eyes scanned my words, I saw what I'd probably been hoping for all along. Their faces changed so quickly it was like a performance. In 2 seconds, anger and confidence gave way to fear and confusion. That moment was priceless. Not wanting to waste another second of my energy on them, I immediately exited the family chat and deleted it from my phone screen. I was fed up with their endless drama, where I was cast as the scapegoat. In the camera footage, I saw them crowded by the front door, waving their arms, arguing, pointing at each other, obviously trying to determine who was to blame and what to do next. Their gestures grew increasingly violent, their faces increasingly angry, but ultimately, they looked simply pathetic. About 15 minutes later, the entire procession, defeated and dejectedly returned to their cars. They loaded their bags, coolers, and portable coolers back into their trunks, as if returning their unfulfilled dreams of a free vacation to their cars. One by one, the cars left the yard, and I watched them drive away with their taillights, and I, sitting in my kitchen, finally calmly finished my cold coffee and returned to my work, feeling in my chest a quiet, but very weighty satisfaction with myself. However, that evening my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, and I decided to answer it. As soon as I said hello, she pounced on me. "How could you do this to us?" No greeting, no question about how I felt, only accusations, only pressure. I even laughed into the phone. "Is that so? Guilt without any preamble? You drove 6 hours expecting me to obediently greet you with bread and salt, and instead you found locked doors. But I warned you that this is my property, and only I decide who can use it and when. You all ignored my words and decided you can do whatever you want with my life." "But we're family," my mother interjected, almost pitifully. "Family," I repeated bitterly. "In a family it's not customary to treat other people's property as if it were common property. In a family it's not customary to turn one person into an ATM. You're being terrible, and from now on, none of you are allowed to come to my house." I heard Mom suck in a breath, her voice shaking. "Angela, you're being unreasonable." But I didn't give her time to justify herself. "And Mom, I'm no longer going to help you financially. No more money for appliances, no more washing machine or microwave. Tell Vanessa I'm no longer paying her car insurance, and tell Aunt Carla and Uncle Nestor that their medical bills are theirs to take care of. It's over." There was silence on the other end of the line, so thick I could hear my own breathing. Finally, Mom exhaled. "That's not what you meant." I interrupted her and said slowly, clearly, "I'm absolutely serious. You've taken advantage of me for years, and I'm done." After these words, I hit the end call button myself, before she could object. Taking a deep breath, I immediately opened my banking app and, without hesitation, canceled all my regular transfers to my parents, the payment that automatically went toward Vanessa's car insurance, and everything else. It was a strange but pleasant feeling, as if I had regained control of my life. For the next few days, my phone was literally blowing up with calls and messages, notifications flashing one after another, and so many names flashed on the screen that I couldn't even distinguish them. Vanessa, Mom, Aunt Carla, Uncle Nestor, my cousins. But I didn't answer a single call. I let them call, leave long voicemails, cajole, threaten, complain, but to me, it was all just noise that no longer had any power over me. The messages shifted like weather fronts. At first, the lion's share of the chat was filled with reproaches and accusations. "How dare you do this to us? You're destroying our family," they typed almost in unison. Then their anger began to melt, and attempts to play on feelings appeared. "We just wanted to spend time together, and families are supposed to help each other." As if all the myths of unconditional mutual support had suddenly been put on display. A few more waves of messages later. Apologies arrived. "Sorry for being presumptuous, perhaps we overstepped our bounds," but I didn't respond to anyone, because I was tired of being a participant in their performances and no longer wanted to give them fodder for manipulation. I stopped playing their games and, 2 weeks later, took a vacation and went to my lake house, where I spent 2 wonderful weeks alone, no unexpected guests, no family drama, no one claiming my property. Every morning, I swam in the cool lake water, feeling the cold envelop me wash away the tension in my shoulders. Then I read books on the veranda, cooked meals just for myself, meticulously measuring portions and pleasures, and went hiking along the nearby trails, collecting some quiet riches in my heart. It was perhaps the most peaceful vacation I'd had in years. Every day, I checked the security cameras to make sure no one tried to come uninvited. But the footage remained blank, as if we'd finally reached an unspoken agreement of non-interference and respect for boundaries. During this time, I thought a lot about how long and patiently my family had treated me. I'd tried so hard for so many years to be helpful, a good daughter and sister, giving money when asked, allowing them to use the house, listening to endless conversations about Vanessa's life while my own life was passed over in silence. And what had all this given me? They took me for granted, as someone who would always give in and never say no. Well, those days are over. When I returned home from vacation, I felt different, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and when I returned to work in the city, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. My boss noticed that I seemed focused and productive. I was assigned to lead a major project that would look good on a resume, and my personal life slowly improved too. I began spending more time with real friends, people who respected my boundaries and didn't treat me like a wallet or a doormat. 2 months after the incident at the lake, I received a text from my mother, the first since our tough conversation. "It's my birthday next week. We really want to see you. We want to talk." And I pondered for a few days. Part of me wanted to ignore them and continue the silence, but another was curious to see if I wanted to hear what they had to say. Finally, I answered, "I'll come for the weekend." And rather than return with the same lavish gifts, I bought my mother an inexpensive but heartwarming gift, completely different from the things I'd previously showered them with: a simple photo frame from a department store, not meant to be a showy surprise, but one big enough to hold a single, good-looking photo without unnecessary inscriptions or promises. That weekend, when I went to see my parents, I was nervous, but at the same time, strangely calm. I was no longer going to let them blame me for everything or label me. I was determined and calm, ready to defend my boundaries, no matter what they said. When I pulled up to my parents' house that Saturday, I noticed several familiar cars already parked in the driveway, Vanessa and Mateo's, along with a couple of my aunt's and uncle's cars. The way they were crowded together made it clear this was going to be much more than just an intimate birthday dinner for Mom. I grabbed the modestly wrapped gift from the car, clutching it tightly in my hands as if it were a shield, and headed for the door. I barely had time to raise my hand to knock when the door opened, revealing Mom. Her eyes filled with nervousness, though she tried to smile and say cheerfully, "Angela, I'm so glad you came." "Hi, Mom, happy birthday," I replied and stepped inside. The living room greeted me with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Every head turned in my direction, their faces reflecting that intense curiosity that arises when conversations are interrupted by something more important than casual chatter. Vanessa sat on the couch next to Mateo, her posture rigid, like a schoolgirl about to be reprimanded, and he, usually confident and vocal, now looked down, as if his words were stuck in his throat. Papa sat in his usual chair, gripping the armrests tightly, as if they could balance this meeting, and my aunts and uncles stood and sat at a distance, clearly unsure of how to behave. Finally, Papa cleared his throat and, composing himself, said, "Angela, we're all so glad you're here. We've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." I nodded and said calmly, "Okay, I'm listening." Vanessa rose from the couch, her hands shaking, and began, "We want forgive us, all of us. We realize we were wrong about the lake house. We shouldn't have assumed we could just take over your property," Mateo added quickly, as if afraid of being interrupted. Aunt Carla nodded, a guilty expression on her face. "Yes, we were disrespectful, too familiar." I glanced around at everyone present. Their expressions, usually confident and even demanding, were now softened, as if they truly weren't pretending, but rather realized the magnitude of how they'd treated me. "We know we messed everything up," Mom said, taking a step closer. "We've been talking about it for weeks, and we've come to the same conclusion, that we treated you terribly." "You're right," Uncle Nestor interjected, lowering his voice as if each word was difficult for him. "It's not so much about the lake house, although that's important. It's about something else." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Dad replied, "What hurt us most was that you stopped talking to us. You cut off all communication, and that's when we realized how much we'd taken you for granted." Mom came closer and, holding back tears, said, "I'm sorry, dear, I'm sorry for always making it all about Vanessa, for thinking your home was ours, for expecting your help without even thanking you or appreciating everything you've done for us." I handed her a small package containing a gift. "Here's your birthday present." She took it, but set it aside without opening it, and looked me straight in the eyes. "Angela, can you forgive us? We want to make things right." I looked around the room again, faces full of tension and hope, Vanessa's eyes clouded with tears, and even Mateo, always so unflappable, looked genuinely remorseful. I took a deep breath and replied, "I need to think about this. I'm not ready to just go back to the way things were." Vanessa stepped toward me and said quietly but firmly, "We understand. We're not asking you to forget everything that happened, we just want a chance to heal. I'm ready to be around all of you again, but it's going to be different," I said. And that simple but firm phrase, spoken calmly, like it drew an invisible line, hung in the room, because I was no longer ready to be the family ATM, nor was I going to let them use my property whenever they wanted, and most importantly, I needed my boundaries to be truly respected. Everyone nodded, and Dad quietly said, "We can do it, we want to do it," and Mom added, "Let the lake house remain closed too." Everyone, at least for now, and that seemed fair. The rest of the birthday was awkward but calmer. We ate cake, tried to talk normally, and for the first time in a long time, Vanessa listened to me when I talked about work. I drove home with mixed feelings, glad that they apologized, and wary, because people don't change overnight, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. Over the next few months, our relationship slowly improved. Mom called once a week just to chat. Vanessa churned out memes and asked how I was doing. Dad sent me data science articles, and even though I could see their efforts, I stood firm. When Mom complained about the refrigerator not working, I didn't rush to buy a new one. When Vanessa whined about the insurance, I didn't pay her bills. Instead, I taught them to respect my boundaries, and little by little, they began to do so. I still went to the lake house, but it remained locked. The cameras were rolling, and I was the only one with the keys. It was my space, my sanctuary, and I wasn't ready to share it. At work, things were looking up. A project I led was a success, and my boss hinted at a promotion. And in my personal life, Nestor appeared, and upon hearing about my family history, he said bluntly, "You did the right thing by setting boundaries," and his support warmed me. I often thought back to the years when duty and the desire to be needed made me both the family's support and their wallet. I bought my mother electronics, paid bills, helped Vanessa through difficult months, and it seemed normal. But now, noticing how they were trying to change, I understood. Boundaries aren't cruelty, but an act of self-respect that teaches others responsibility. There were moments of doubt. Would I become cruel by abandoning my old roles? But I was worried about something else, whether I could trust them again. So I moved slowly, evaluating actions rather than words, and appreciated the small signs of change: a call without asking for money, a message simply with a joke, help offered sincerely. Those months taught me caution and gave me wonder. Caution, to remember the purpose of boundaries, and wonder at how much respect emerges in a relationship when someone is given a clear no. 6 months later. On a typical day, Vanessa called, "Hey, can I ask you something?" I know the lake house is still closed, and I completely respect that, but I was wondering if maybe sometime in the future, like next summer, Mateo and I could come visit you, just for the weekend, asking permission first, and following all the rules you've set up. I thought about it. "Maybe," I replied. "Let me think about it. That's all I ask," she said. "Thank you for considering it." After we hung up, I sat on the porch, leaning my elbows on the railing, and suddenly it was clear to me that something had changed, and it wasn't just a pleasant experience, but a small change that shifted the usual order of things by a fraction of a degree. Vanessa had actually asked permission. She hadn't assumed, she hadn't demanded, she had politely asked and accepted that I could say no, and it was a progressive step, so subtle and human that I almost didn't notice the warmth of hope in my chest. I still wasn't sure if I was ready to ever let all my relatives use the lake house again. Maybe someday, maybe not, and that was okay, because the house was my property, my sanctuary, my decision, and in the end, they finally understood that. Our relationship with my family didn't suddenly become perfect, and I don't think it ever will be, but it began to change to a point where it became manageable. We'd occasionally call each other, and Mom wouldn't just ask for advice about a new microwave, but just to chat. Vanessa would send memes and occasionally ask how I was doing. Dad no longer discussed other people's plans with me, but sent me links on data science, thinking it would go over well, and most importantly, I stopped feeling used. I realized that it was okay to say no to family, okay to protect what was mine, and okay to demand respect, even from those who were supposed to love me unconditionally. A year had passed since the incident with the lake house. My career had taken off. I'd been promoted to senior data analyst and received a significant raise. Things were serious with Nestoril. We were strengthening our relationship and even discussing moving in together, and the family dynamic had stabilized to a point where I felt comfortable living with that balance. We communicated regularly, but not constantly. I visited them a few times a year for holidays and birthdays. They visited me for the first time, just once, but it was a meaningful gesture. Mom and Dad had learned to budget, replaced the dishwasher themselves when it finally gave out. Vanessa was paying her own insurance and found a better paying job. While the changes weren't huge, they were significant. The lake house remained my sanctuary. The cameras worked, the doors had new locks, I was the only one with the keys, and I needed to feel like this space was truly mine. Sometimes I wondered if I was being cruel, but I knew that without that confidence, the old order would return in a matter of days. One day toward the end of summer, as I was lying on the armchair reading on the porch, Nestoril called. "Hey, I've been thinking about something," he said. "You mentioned that you might let the family visit the lake house again someday. Do you think you're ready for that?" I thought about it and admitted, I ask myself the same question. Part of me thinks enough time has passed, but another part remembers how they behaved and is afraid of old habits returning. "What's my gut feeling?" he asked. "Want me to tell you?" I replied, and told him that my gut was telling me to only allow Vanessa and Matteo to come over for the weekend, only if they asked first and strictly adhered to the rules I had set. "That sounds reasonable," Nestoril said. "Think again." A few weeks later, Vanessa called again. "Angela, I know I've asked before, but I had to ask again. Could you please let Matteo and me come to the lake house? We'll be respectful, clean up after ourselves, and stay as long as you allow." It was the third time in the past year she'd asked. Each time, she'd spoken quietly and politely, not pushing when I'd said I wasn't ready, and once, there was a hint of hope in her voice. "What if you came for a weekend next month?" And before I thought too long, I said quietly but firmly, "Just you and Matteo, no other family members." A pause, a long breath, then a whisper, "Really? Are you sure?" "I'm willing to try," I said, "but, Vanessa, if you betray my trust again, that's it, there won't be another chance." "I understand, thank you, Angela, we won't let you down," she replied, and in that simple "we won't let you down" was the promise I needed to hear before I could open the door to my little peace. When the weekend arrived, I went to the lake house early to get everything in order. I checked the cameras, went through the rooms, checked the kitchen cabinets, put out new bedspreads and arranged candles. Because even the little things matter if you want a calm, fight-free meeting. I knew that control over the circumstances would give me peace of mind. Vanessa and Matteo showed up exactly on time, as promised. They brought their food, carefully packed their bags, and, most importantly for me, they didn't ask for anything or demand anything, and the days flew by quietly and simply. We swam, walked along the paths, sat on the veranda and talked about trivial things that suddenly had a new meaning. Respectful and without pressure, they cleaned up after themselves, didn't argue about the schedule, and accepted the rules I had established as self-evident. When it was time to leave on Sunday, Vanessa came over, squeezed my hand, and, leaning in close, whispered, "Thank you for giving us another chance, it means so much," and I felt a warm but cautious light spread within me. It was a small step, but real. After they left, I sat on the steps and stared for a long time at the mirror of the water, where the lights of the last sun flitted, and thought about simple things. That change doesn't happen instantly, but if people are willing to learn, they have a chance. And now I didn't have to return to my old state of being used and taken for granted. I learned to assert my right to say no, and this is already the beginning of a new life. A few months later, Nestoril and I got engaged, and when I shared the news, my family reacted differently than they had the year before. Mom, without rushing or trying to boss me around, offered to help with the preparations. Vanessa asked if I wanted her to be at the ceremony, and I agreed, not because I had to, but because I truly wanted her by my side on this important day. At the engagement party, Dad pulled me aside, took my hand, and, looking me in the eye, said, "I'm proud of you, Angela, not just for your career and your engagement, but for standing up for yourself last year." His words resonated with me like a genuine confession, not someone else's, because they were filled with both regret and gratitude. Now, sitting in my apartment, torn between wedding plans and to-do lists, I often think back to that year when everything changed. I became happier and more confident, my professional recognition grew, and my personal life gave me hope for a peaceful future. Meanwhile, my boundaries with my family remained unshakable. The lake house remains my sanctuary, the doors are locked, I have the keys, the cameras are rolling, and I invite only those who respect the rules. I no longer give money to relatives out of habit, nor do I allow my parents and sister to take my generosity for granted. Some will call me abrupt or touchy, but I know I'm protecting not only my property, but my right to a calm, respectable life. My family has shown that they can change and learn. They started calling without asking for help. They began to take an interest in my work and listen when I speak. It was a long, uneven process, but it has borne fruit. However, I'm not so naive as to think the risk has completely disappeared, so I remain cautious. That's why I have cameras. That's why the locks are new. That's why I think before I say yes. That's why I protect what's dear to me. Be careful before you say yes. I've learned the hard way that family doesn't necessarily mean unlimited access to your life, your property, or your resources. Love and respect must be mutual.